How much of your life have you spent running? Running from failure, from rejection, from disappointment, and above all, from pain itself. We're taught that a good life is a comfortable life, one without conflict or adversity. We build intricate walls around our hearts, seeking peace in narrow comfort zones, only to discover we're standing still, weak, and stagnant. But what if we've gotten it completely wrong? What if the very thing we strain to avoid is the single key to unlocking strength, resilience, and the greatest version of ourselves? There was a philosopher who dared to stare into the abyss of existence and offered a claim that could change everything. Pain is not an enemy to be annihilated, but an ally, a catalyst to be understood and harnessed. He didn't hand us a painkiller. He handed us a hammer to smash through our outdated limits. Today, we're going to challenge the most common notion of safety. We'll explore a radical perspective: how to embrace adversity strategically, how to turn our fiercest struggles into a springboard for deep self-discovery, so that we can rise from the ashes as the strongest and most authentic version of who we are. The philosopher who dared to look straight into that abyss, the one who forged a steel-hard philosophy from a life marked by pain, was Friedrich Nietzsche. Today, we're going to dive into one of his most revolutionary and most misunderstood ideas: the intimate relationship between suffering and greatness. We're not here to romanticize pain, but to dissect it. Nietzsche challenges us with a premise that's frightening yet liberating. Pain is not a flaw in creation, not a punishment, but a necessary condition, a potential ally, and perhaps the single catalyst for real strength. The relevance of this idea in the modern world is undeniable. We live in an age obsessed with comfort. The quick-fix culture promises us a life without friction, without failure, without discomfort. Every app, every service, every advertisement seems to say, you don't have to endure. But in that effort to avoid at all costs, we unintentionally become weaker, more fragile, and emptier. We dodge hard conversations. We abandon big goals for fear of failing. We look for ways to numb our emotions instead of facing them, and then we wonder why we feel stuck. This is exactly why Nietzsche's thought is more urgent than ever. He doesn't hand us a sedative. He gives us a training toolkit. The goal of this video is to explore together the core concepts in his philosophy. We will decode the archetype of the Übermensch, the human being who rises above ordinary limits by using adversity itself. We will learn to practice Amor Fati, love of fate, a strategy not only to accept, but to love whatever happens. We will analyze the deep drive of the will to power and how it builds resilience from the inside out. The central message is clear. Your struggles are not the end of the sentence. They can be used, consciously and strategically, as a springboard for self-discovery, for sharpening character, and ultimately for becoming the strongest, most authentic version of yourself. To truly grasp this philosophy, we have to understand the man who wrote it. Friedrich Nietzsche was not a desk-bound scholar writing about pain from the safety of an ivory tower. He was a battlefield. Born in 1844 in Prussia, Nietzsche was a prodigy who became the youngest professor of classical philology in the history of the University of Basel, but his brilliant academic career was cut short. Most of his adult life was an unending struggle with illness. He was tormented by crippling migraines that could lay him low for weeks. His eyesight was nearly blind, and his body continually betrayed him. He had to give up teaching, withdraw from society and become a wandering, solitary philosopher, traveling across Europe in search of a climate that might soothe his physical pain. It was in that absolute isolation and relentless suffering that he wrote. He did not write in spite of pain. He wrote from pain itself. His philosophy was forged in the furnace of personal anguish. When he speaks of strength, it's because he understands weakness. When he speaks of overcoming, it's because every day was a battle to push beyond the limits of his own body. The age he lived in was also an age of collapse. The 19th century witnessed the rise of science and the decline of traditional religious values, what Nietzsche boldly declared with the phrase, "God is dead." He saw that with the fall of old value systems, humanity stood at the edge of a nihilistic abyss, a dangerous vacuum of meaning. People had lost their old moral compass, but had not yet found a new one. From the ashes of his personal health and the ruins of collective values, Nietzsche took on an extraordinary task to create a new value system, a system not based on rewards in the afterlife, but on the affirmation of life right here, right now. His classics, like Thus Spoke Zarathustra and Beyond Good and Evil, were his attempt to answer the question, how do we live a meaningful life in a universe that no longer hands out ready-made meaning? His answer begins in the very place most of us try to avoid, pain itself. The first principle, and the foundation of Nietzsche's entire system of thought, is a truth most of us try to deny. It isn't a complex strategy. It's a bare acceptance of reality. He stated it bluntly. To live is to suffer. To exist is to find meaning in suffering. This is not a pessimistic verdict. It's a diagnosis. Nietzsche isn't saying life is nothing but suffering. He's asserting that suffering and hardship are inseparable, non-transferable parts of the human experience. Like breathing, they are a fundamental condition of existence. We cannot choose a life without pain any more than we can choose a life without gravity. Every attempt to construct a permanent heaven without friction fails, because life itself, by nature, is movement, is conflict, is the reaching upward against obstacles. What matters is not whether pain exists, because it certainly does, but how we interpret and respond to it. This is Nietzsche's great reversal. While other systems seek to eliminate or soothe pain, Nietzsche asks, how can we use it? To understand this, consider a familiar image, the growth of muscle. When you lift a heavy object, what are you doing? You're tearing microscopic muscle fibers. It's a process of micro-level damage. It hurts, and it's precisely in the body's repair and regeneration of those tears that the muscle becomes stronger and thicker. Without the initial tearing, there is no growth. The body has no reason to adapt. Mental pain and adversity operate by the same mechanism. They are the weights for the soul. A life without challenges, a life completely shielded from failure, loss, and disappointment, does not generate inner strength. It leads to stagnation. Like an unused muscle, it will atrophy. This stagnation is a fate more frightening than pain itself, because it is the refusal of potential, the surrender before the battle begins. A completely comfortable life blocks real transformation. It keeps us stuck at a weak, unfinished version of ourselves. This stands in sharp opposition to our quick-fix culture. The modern world constantly whispers in our ears that discomfort is a bad signal, that we must eliminate it immediately. We seek distraction, we take pills, we scroll endlessly, we do anything to numb ourselves from the feeling of pain. But through Nietzsche's lens, this is not only cowardice, it's a terrible waste. Pain is raw material. It is untapped energy. When you feel the pain of failure, that is raw material for wisdom. When you feel shattered by loss, that is raw material for compassion. When you feel fear before a great challenge, that is raw material for courage. By constantly chasing comfort, we are throwing away the most precious material for forging character. We are weakening ourselves. Therefore, the first question Nietzsche poses to us is not, "How do I get rid of pain?" but, "Am I willing to view this pain as a necessary part of my growth journey?" Only when we answer yes can we begin the great training. Only then can we ask the next question. So, what ideal form will emerge from this training? Imagine a seed. It lies deep beneath the dark, cold earth, pressed down by the weight of the whole world above. It could choose to stay safe inside its shell, but the life within it, the deep will to power, urges it to do something that seems almost suicidal. It cracks open. It wounds itself, sending roots deeper into the darkness while pushing its tender shoot through the hard soil, struggling without pause just to find a ray of light it has never truly seen. Human growth is no different. We are that seed, and adversity is the dense layer of soil. A life without challenges, a life sheltered in a greenhouse with perfect temperature and never a gust of wind, will produce a frail sapling, unable to withstand the first real storm of life, the stagnation, boredom, and emptiness so many of us feel. That is the symptom of a soul living in a greenhouse, a soul being kept from the struggle it needs. Now, contrast that seed with our quick fix culture. We've become masters at building a valley of comfort. Whenever we're bored, we have endless screens to distract us. Whenever we're anxious, we have pills that promise peace. Whenever we face hard work, we look for a shortcut, a hack to get results without effort. We've turned comfort into a god, and we are paying for it with our very strength. Nietzsche would say we're wasting our most precious resource. We are wasting our pain. Consider a very practical scenario. Failure in your career. You pour your heart into a project, and it collapses. You're fired from the job you thought was secure. What's the natural reaction? Shame, anger, blame, retreat. Quick fix culture will tell you, forget it, go travel, buy something new, find an instant distraction. But what does Nietzsche's lens see? He sees a golden opportunity. The pain of that failure is raw material. It forces you to look back. Where are my skills lacking? Were my assumptions wrong? Am I truly passionate about this path, or am I following it only for safety? This pain, if faced honestly, is the fire that forges wisdom. It's the push to learn a new skill, to rebuild more wisely, to discover a more authentic path. If you run from it, you don't just forfeit growth, you practically guarantee you'll repeat the same mistake in the future. Here's the core. Suffering is not an event outside the growth journey. It is the journey. It's not the monster blocking the road. It is the road. And when a person begins to understand this, when they stop running and start deliberately using that fire to train themselves, They begin to walk the path toward becoming something greater. They begin the journey of the Übermensch. If pain is the raw material and adversity is the fire, then what is the goal of this grueling forging process? What are we trying to sculpt from the rough stone of existence? Nietzsche's answer lies in one of his most ambitious, exalted, and controversial concepts, the Übermensch, or Overman. Before we go any further, let's immediately discard the image of a comic book superhero. Nietzsche's Übermensch is not a flying being with superhuman physical strength. It is an ideal for the human spirit. It is a state of becoming, an ideal to strive toward. The Übermensch is the model of a human who has surpassed ordinary limits, who has broken the chains of so-called human nature, laziness, fear, weakness, and the need for the crowd's approval. Here is the crux. The Übermensch is the person who creates values for themselves. In the God is dead context, Nietzsche described a world where old moral and religious systems have lost their authority. Ordinary people fall into panic or nihilism. But the Übermensch does not. Instead of seeking meaning from an external power, they themselves become the source of meaning. They look into the chaos of the universe and have the courage to say, I will create my own order. I will define what is good, what is great. So, how does one reach this state? The answer brings us back to the beginning. The Übermensch is not someone born into a perfect environment. They are not someone who avoids suffering. On the contrary, they are someone who actively uses suffering as a staircase to excellence. They are someone who has learned to alchemize pain, turning it from poisonous lead into the pure gold of personal strength. Adversity, for the Übermensch, is the catalyst. Like a master blacksmith, they do not fear the flame. They understand that without fire and pressure, there can be no steel. Every failure, every loss, every fear they face is a hammer blow, knocking off the weak impurities and shaping an unbreakable core of strength. They don't ask, why is this happening to me? They ask, how can I use this? Becoming the Übermensch is not a one-time event. It is a continuous process of self-overcoming. This is the real battle, the relentless struggle to surpass the weaker version of yourself from yesterday. It demands meeting hardship with creativity. When you want to quit but keep going, that is self-overcoming. When you are afraid but act anyway, that is self-overcoming. When you choose what is difficult and right over what is easy and trivial, that is self-overcoming. And one essential clarification. This concept has been distorted throughout history. The Übermensch is not about dominating others. That is a harmful misunderstanding. The drive of the Übermensch is not aimed outward to oppress, but inward to master. The point is self-mastery. The ability to fully govern your own desires, fears, and weaknesses. To create new values from a direct confrontation with suffering. To become the author of your destiny instead of a victim of circumstance. Imagine a forge. A master blacksmith doesn't see the raging fire and the brutal hammer as enemies. He sees them as essential tools. He knows that to transform a rough, useless bar of metal into a sharp, balanced, powerful blade, he must heat it in the hottest fire and strike it with the strongest force. Adversity is that fire and hammer, and the Übermensch is the one who forges their own soul. They actively alchemize pain into personal power. We're unconsciously drawn to stories like this in popular culture. Consider one of the strongest symbols of resilience, Batman. Bruce Wayne didn't merely get over the trauma of witnessing his parents' murder. He didn't run from it. He did something more radical. He used it. He alchemized that horrific night into purpose. The pain of loss wasn't repressed or forgotten. It was consciously transformed into iron discipline, an unbreakable will, and a code he authored himself. He went into his own darkness and turned it into a weapon for justice. That is self-overcoming taken to the extreme. Or, look at Harry Potter's journey. His entire life is shaped by loss and hardship. He is the embodiment of someone who faces pain from birth. But what makes him a hero isn't that he avoids pain. It's that he repeatedly chooses to confront it. Each school year brings a new trial, a new fear, a new loss. And each time, instead of collapsing, he uses that pain, the pain of loss, the pain of responsibility, as fuel to learn, to fight, and to grow. What matters most in these examples is the contrast. Both Batman and Harry have adversaries, like the Joker or Voldemort, who also suffered. But here's the difference. The villains seek to dominate others to avenge their pain. They are slaves to it. The hero, the one who carries the spirit of the Übermensch, seeks self-mastery. They create new values from their direct encounter with suffering. And here's what that means for us. This process of self-overcoming isn't distant or abstract. It happens every day. It's when the artist faces the blank page and the fear of being not good enough. It's when the entrepreneur confronts a failed project and chooses to analyze and learn instead of blame. It's when any one of us decides to face a hard truth about ourselves with honesty and creativity instead of running to distraction. Becoming the Übermensch isn't about becoming untouchable. It's about becoming relentlessly resilient. But to use pain like a blacksmith, we must first accept its existence. We cannot forge a piece of metal we pretend isn't there. This demands an attitude deeper than acceptance. It demands a love, a full affirmation, what Nietzsche calls Amor Fati. The path of the Übermensch is a path of training. But to become a master blacksmith of the soul, to be able to pick up adversity like a hammer, you cannot be disgusted by that hammer. You cannot hate the fire you need. You must adopt an entirely new attitude toward the very tools of transformation. This brings us to one of the most beautiful, radical, and perhaps hardest to accept ideas in Nietzsche's entire philosophy. It's a Latin phrase that encapsulates a whole world view. Amor Fati. Simply translated, it means love of fate. Immediately, we have to pause. This is not passive acceptance. This is not the resignation we often mistake for acceptance. This is not gritting your teeth and saying, I guess I have to live with it. Amor Fati, as Nietzsche defines it, is something infinitely more powerful. It is not only accepting, but welcoming and loving everything that happens in one's life, and he emphasizes that this includes, indeed, especially includes, the most painful events, the most harrowing losses, the bitterest failures. Why would a rational person love their own tragedies? Nietzsche believed this is the very formula for greatness. He believed that by affirming the whole of life, not just the good parts, but the entire picture, including the dark patches and the tears, we perform a psychological miracle. We transform challenges from random, meaningless obstacles into indispensable tools for sharpening character. Amor Fati is the attitude that lets us look back at a failure and say, I needed that. That exact event, at that exact time, forged me. This attitude stands in total contrast to the typical human reaction, one we all know too well. What's the usual response? Resistance. Faced with hardship, we complain. We blame other people, the system, the universe, ourselves. We drown in the loops of if only and why me. Nietzsche would say all of this. Resistance, complaining, blaming, is a catastrophic waste of energy. We're squandering our precious mental strength fighting something unchangeable, reality. We argue with what has already happened, and that is a battle we always lose. This wasted energy is the root of bitterness, resentment, and exhaustion. Amor Fati is the path out of that waste. It's a two-step process. First, it is complete acceptance of reality. This means looking straight at the truth, however brutal, and saying, it is what it is. This acceptance innocently extinguishes the flames of pointless resistance. Second, and this is crucial, after accepting, we act as constructively as possible within those circumstances. This is why Amor Fati is not passive. It is supreme agency. By accepting reality, we free up all the energy that used to be drained by complaining and resisting. That energy is now liberated, ready to be directed into problem-solving, learning, creating, and rebuilding. This is a deliberate choice. You are actively choosing your interpretation. A core practical method for this is to change the questions you ask yourself. Most of us, when confronted with tragedy, cry out, "Why me?" That is a victim's question. It doesn't seek answers, it seeks pity. A practitioner of Amor Fati learns to replace that question with a far more powerful one. What can I learn from this? Or, how can I use this? This simple shift in questioning is a revolution. It instantly changes your position from a passive victim to an active student, an artist searching for material. It is a conscious choice to reject bitterness and free your energy for solving problems. That is the attitude of the Übermensch. That is how they turn lead into gold. But what drives them to do it? What compels a person to choose the hard road of Amor Fati over the comfort of complaining? That driving force is the will to power. Let's consider a scenario familiar to all of us. A failed career. You're laid off from your job, not because you're lazy or incompetent, but perhaps due to a restructuring, a leadership decision beyond your control. The usual reaction, the reaction of resistance, takes hold immediately. Why me? I worked so hard. This is so unfair. My boss is blind. We complain. We assign blame. Every minute we sink into these thoughts is a catastrophic waste of energy. We're burning our mental strength trying to argue with a settled fact. The result is exhaustion and bitterness. Now, imagine a practitioner of Amor Fati facing the exact same situation. That person also feels the initial shock. They also feel the pain of loss. Amor Fati is not about becoming an emotionless robot. But instead of getting stuck there, they begin an active process. The first step is radical acceptance of reality. I lost my job, This is the truth. It has happened. Instantly, the war with reality ends. Energy is no longer wasted on if only. Second, they change the question. They stop asking, why me? And start asking, what can I learn from this? Or, how will I use this? This is where the miracle happens. Perhaps the answer is, this job was holding me back. Its false sense of security made me stagnant. Now, I'm free. Or maybe, this shows me I'm weak in political communication. I need to train that. Or even, this loss gives me the chance to start the business I've always been afraid of. See it? The event hasn't changed. But by loving it, by affirming it as a necessary part of their story, that person has turned a potential disaster into an indispensable catalyst. They didn't just get over it, they used it. They acted as constructively as possible within the circumstances. Amor Fati is an active choice to strip out bitterness and liberate all your energy for problem solving. It's the ultimate posture of a creator. They don't merely accept the hand they're dealt. They love those cards and play them with all their skill. But what in the deepest core of a human being can drive such an extraordinary act? What makes us choose the steep ascent of Amor Fati over the comfortable valley of complaining? It is the most fundamental drive of life, a force Nietzsche believed even stronger than the will to survive. It is the will to power. We've walked through a demanding journey. We've faced the raw truth that suffering sits at the core of the human experience. We've contemplated the archetype of the Übermensch, an ideal of the human being who breaks limits by forging themselves in adversity. And we've learned the radical posture of Amor Fati, not merely accepting, but loving our fate. But now, the most practical and urgent question arises. So, how? How can an ordinary person, struggling with work pressure, complex relationships, and the anxieties of the 21st century, actually do this? We don't just want to understand the philosophy, we want to live it. This is where we move from why to how. This is the practical application, where we switch on the inner engine. And that engine, the most fundamental drive behind all life, is what Nietzsche called the will to power. Here is the first and most important practical application. You must recognize and harness this drive. Right away, we need to clear up a harmful misunderstanding. The will to power is not a desire to dominate outwardly, not political oppression or trampling others. That's a distortion. For Nietzsche, the most basic drive within each of us, from a tree reaching for light to a human being hungry to grow, is the will to expand, to achieve, to surpass our current limits. And its highest form, the form the Übermensch pursues, is not world domination. It is self-overcoming. It is the relentless effort to master your own weaknesses, to surpass your own previous accomplishments. It is the inner battle to become stronger, wiser, and more whole than you were yesterday. So how do we apply this? The answer lies in its very fuel. The will to power is not nourished by comfort. It's nourished by resistance. Struggle and adversity are the essential fuel for the will to power. When everything is too easy, we stagnate. Our will atrophies. But when we face a wall, a challenge, a hardship, the will to power awakens. It rouses a determination within us to solve, to fight, to grow. Look at Thomas Edison. He didn't treat thousands of failed experiments as failures. He saw them as indispensable steps in the creative process. That is the will to power in action, the will to impose order on chaos, to turn impossible into possible. Or consider Helen Keller, deprived of both sight and hearing, seemingly the ultimate victim of fate. Yet, she tapped into an extraordinary inner will, transforming extreme adversity into the driving force behind great achievement, inspiring millions. Here is a concrete strategy for you. Cultivate your will to power. Instead of avoiding challenges, actively seek them. Set yourself stretch goals. Learn a difficult skill. Take on a project that scares you. Choose the steep mountain path over the flat, familiar road. Every time you deliberately choose difficulty over comfort for the sake of growth, you are training and strengthening your will to power. You are turning Nietzsche's theory into the muscle of the spirit. And this brings us to the second practical application, and the inevitable result of training the will to power, building resilience, and something even greater. Nietzsche saw suffering as a crucial test of our resilience. He did not view challenge as punishment. He saw it as a signal that growth is underway. Return to the image of the seed we discussed. It must struggle in the dark, break its own shell, and push through dense soil to rise. That struggle is not an accident. It is part of the design. Without it, the seed never becomes a strong tree. In modern terms, we have a powerful concept for this. Anti-fragile, introduced by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. Fragile is what breaks under shock like a glass. Robust is what withstands shock like a rubber ball. But anti-fragile is something else entirely. Systems that don't just endure shocks, they become stronger because of them. The human immune system is one example. It grows more capable after fighting pathogens. And the human spirit, in Nietzsche's view, is inherently anti-fragile. We are designed to become stronger after facing trials, provided we face them correctly. So what's the practical application here? How do we train resilience and activate our own anti-fragility? First, it's an exercise in honesty. We must deliberately step out of our comfort zone and face difficult emotions honestly, instead of avoiding or numbing them. When you feel anxious, instead of immediately seeking distraction, sit with it. Ask it, "What are you trying to tell me?" Second, and this is the most important, refuse the victim role. The moment you blame circumstances, other people, or fate, you hand away all your power. You become fragile. The ultimate strategy to activate resilience is to take responsibility for your interpretation. The event is objective. You are laid off. You fail. You are rejected. That's reality. But the meaning of that event is entirely up to you. You can interpret it as the end, fragile, or you can interpret it as the beginning of a lesson, anti-fragile. By refusing the victim role and deliberately interpreting adversity as an opportunity for training, you are activating your resilience at the highest level. You are combining the will to power, the drive to act, with Amor Fati. At this point, it is no longer philosophy. It is an action plan for building an inner life that cannot be destroyed. Of course, we need to be honest with each other. Applying Nietzsche's philosophy is not an easy path. The road he outlines isn't merely arduous. For many, it can feel ruthless. a fair question arises immediately. Does loving one's fate dangerously romanticize pain? How can we tell someone enduring an unbearable loss, an irreparable tragedy, or systemic injustice that they should love it? Some critics argue that focusing too heavily on strength and the Übermensch ideal can breed arrogance, selfishness, and a disregard for the weak. Could this philosophy unintentionally become callous, stripped of basic compassion? And is it suitable for everyone, especially those struggling with deep psychological wounds or depression, where the very will seems extinguished? These are important questions, and they help us approach this philosophy with balance. Nietzsche's thought is not a cure-all, and it certainly does not replace compassion or professional support when needed. But perhaps what he wants us to see is this: easy compassion, or pity, can sometimes be the very thing that keeps us stuck in the swamp of weakness. The strength he speaks of is not the strength to trample others. It's the strength to stop being a burden to ourselves through constant lament. It is a perspective that demands extraordinary courage to face. We've reached the end of our journey. Through exploring Nietzsche's philosophy, we've seen that suffering is not a period. It can be the beginning of greatness. We've seen that the greatest achievements in history, in art, in science, were not born from comfort. They were forged by adversity. It is hardship that forces us to innovate, to dig deeper, to discover paths no one else dared to walk. Nietzsche's core message, though it may seem harsh, is in essence profoundly optimistic. It is a belief in the boundless potential of the human spirit. It is the affirmation that no failure is final, unless we choose to accept it as such. Today, start viewing your struggles in a new light, not as a curse, but as a forge. And always ask yourself the most important question, the question Nietzsche left us, because in the end, the answer to it is the key to enduring everything. He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. So what is your why? Understanding why we must endure is step one. The next step, and the crucial one, is learning how to endure effectively in everyday life. If the Nietzschean philosophy we've just explored is the flame that illuminates your purpose, then Stoicism is the armor that lets you carry that flame onto the battlefield of real life. And so, don't leave just yet when you've only found the flame. Our journey continues immediately. Come with me to find the armor to equip ourselves. I've prepared the next video. It's appearing right now on your screen. Click it, and we'll move forward together. Don't stop. Please follow and support the channel. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the very next video.